Welcome everyone, and if you are a regular viewer of this channel, then you'll notice a couple of immediate differences, one of which is that my usual mellifluous tones aren't present. It sometimes happens when I have a cold that I lose my voice. It's not entirely gone, but it's not what it was. And so I'm going to croak my way through this. I'm feeling okay, so you don't need to sympathise, but I just sound a bit odd. So I wanted to keep things short and simple today, and one way of simplifying it was I'm not going to do fancy stuff in the background. So what you see here, this is real background. I can actually interact with it. I can pull books off shelves and things. This is my study, or at least part of it. I'm not going to let you see the floor. You'd be shocked by that. I mean, this is bad enough. Anyway, short and simple. I don't do short easily. I've got a lot to say, but I am going to avoid doing music because my singing voice is entirely absent. So if you want a hymn or a song, then I suggest pause the video and pick a favourite hymn and sing it, or go and find a hymn on YouTube somewhere and listen to that. And with prayers too, again, I'm not going to offer prayers, but please do pause the video and pray at any point or at the end, offer your own prayers. But what I am going to do is welcome you to Sleaford Methodist Circuit's worship. I'm going to try this in one continuous take. If I end up coughing quite a bit, then I'll edit that out, so there might be little jumps. We'll see how we get on. My name's Paul Coburn. I'm the minister, the superintendent minister of the circuit. And it's the third week in Lent, and we're going to look at two short excerpts from two of the set passages for this Sunday. I'm not reading either one at length. I find it easier to shorten readings than shorten what I want to say about them. So let's start with an Old Testament reading. This is from Isaiah chapter 55, and I'm just reading the first 2.5 verses. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labour on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me, hear me, that your soul may live. Come, buy wine, buy milk, without money. That passage struck me as relevant to the state of the world that we find ourselves in at the moment, because if you've been paying attention to the news, you'll know that oil prices and fuel prices in general are on the increase, and this affects the everyday person like you and I when we go to fill up our car with petrol, or when we are trying to keep our houses warm through central heating. But it has an effect on the manufacturing industry, because that takes energy and that takes fuel. Things have to be transported around the country, and of course the cost of that's going up. And apparently in agriculture, the price of oil affects the price of fertilizers, which are essential. So the cost of food is going up, and not just because of that, but the war in Ukraine has taken out of the equation large wheat producing areas of the world in Ukraine itself and in the parts of Russia nearby. There's a whole part of the world there that produces crops that are distributed for people to eat. And in the war, these things are not going to be happening as they used to. So where does that leave us? Well, I heard someone the other day on the radio talking about the food supply situation. His opinion was that in Britain at least we would not end up being short of food, that there would always be food in the supermarkets on the shelves, but we'd have to pay more for it. And for some people that may not be a big deal. They just dig a bit deeper in their pockets and fork out what they need to fork out. But for some, it may mean having to cut back on certain luxuries, cut back on some things in order to afford the essentials. And for many, people who are already living hand to mouth, as it were, and are really struggling even to afford enough food and enough warmth in the home, then these people are faced with the option of going hungry or getting cold or getting into debt, or maybe all three. So it is a very worrying time. I don't have solutions to this, I'm sad to say. As a Christian minister, I suppose my only advice would be that this is something we need to pray for. We need to pray for those who are vulnerable and will be suffering as a result of increased prices. We need to pray for those in government at all levels, that the decisions they make will actually help to minimise the impact of the increase in prices. And if we want practical action, I would remind you that it's always good for those who have to share with those who don't have. And we do have a duty to share our blessings and to help those who are most vulnerable. But I didn't come here to talk about the state of the world. It was really that was the trigger to make me think more deeply about the passage I've just read, about buying milk and wine without money. And I thought, well, in this day and age, that would surely be a really good news if you were able to do that. But of course, God is speaking through Isaiah, not about literally the wine and the milk and the bread that he mentions elsewhere. It's not just about these practical things. He's using these things as a metaphor for something more important, something deeper. But ever since I first came across this passage, and it was a long time ago I first read it, one thing's always puzzled me a little bit, and that is, how can you buy something without money? It's not that I don't believe God is willing to provide some things for free, but if it's for free, how can you buy it? If it's for free, then you just receive it, don't you? That's not the same as buying. Buying is a suggestion that money changes hands. I was involved loosely in a charity way back now in another circuit, where the shop collected all kinds of things, furniture especially, but other things as well, and sold that to the people who really needed it. And they made a conscious choice to sell it and not give it away. It was sold for ridiculously cheap prices, really just nominal amounts, but the feeling was that it gave some sort of respect and it kept the dignity of the people who needed these things. They didn't just come for a handout, they came to buy, to spend their money, even though it was a very small amount, on the things that they vitally needed. And it gave them a sense of ownership. And I could see the advantage of that. But that's it's not buying with no money, that's buying with a little bit of money, and that still counts as buying. How can you buy something without money? Well, actually, the phrase is come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. And that reminds us that money is not the only cost. If I need milk, for example, and it's available at the corner shop, what does it cost me? Well, it costs a certain amount of money, but it also costs me time. Say 10 minutes, 4 minutes to walk to the shop, 2 minutes for the transaction, 4 minutes back again. If it's a day where it's pouring with rain and it's too windy to cope with an umbrella, then it's going to cost me a bit longer time because it will be harder to get there and back. And I'm going to come back soaking wet. It's going to be uncomfortable. So it will cost me my comfort. If in an extreme case I am bedbound, I'm so ill that I struggle even to get up, and all I want to do is stay in bed, because I know once I start moving it will trigger aches and pains. The cost of the milk then will be the willpower to get out of bed, the pain of struggling to get dressed and then hobbling slowly to the shop, and the knowledge that when I get back exhausted, that those aches and pains that I've triggered are going to be with me for the rest of the day, and I'm going to have a difficult and agonising day. Sometimes the cost might be too much for the benefit that you're getting, but I'm trying to suggest that money is not the only cost. At the very least, time, effort, possibly discomfort, or even pain and suffering might be part of the cost. In Isaiah, we are told, why spend money on what is not bread, and your labour on what does not satisfy? The effort we put in, that's part of the cost. Now, does that help us to understand how you can buy something without money and without cost? Well, not really, because it's saying there's no cost at all. So maybe I'll come back to that. Maybe I'm overthinking it, and at this point I should just shrug and move on, but maybe we'll come back to it. But let's think of the possibility of, is anything really free anyway? In the past, I've had lively discussions with my wife over the phrase, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I think we both agreed that that is a true statement, but I think we interpreted it slightly differently, and hence a lively discussion sometimes. But the basic meaning is, if you're offered something for free, there's a catch somewhere. Nothing's really free. There's always going to be some catch. You'll be paying for it somehow. And by and large, that is true. But I can imagine a scenario where, for example, a company is promoting a product by offering a prize, that if you buy the product, your name will go into a raffle, and some lucky person will win a valuable prize. And the company is paying for the prize, but they're doing so because they're expecting that the attraction of the raffle will cause more people to buy the product, and therefore put their profits up more than the cost of the prize. So for the company, it's a good thing to do. But there is a cost. The people who are buying the product are paying the cost. However, my argument here would be that the one lucky person who wins the prize, surely they are getting something free. They do get the free lunch. It comes without strings. It comes without cost, or at least without cost to them, especially if they didn't know anything about the raffle and they were going to buy the product anyway. So the raffle was nothing to do with it. They bought the product. They happen to win a prize as a result, and it's free. But somebody's borne the cost. I remember years ago, I tried to illustrate this at a service in what used to be called the Children's Address at that point. It was soon after the pound coins had come in as a currency instead of the notes. And I had 5 bright, shiny pound coins, and I offered them for sale within the church, 5 of them, and they were going to cost 10 pence each. And it wasn't too difficult to find, especially among the children, 5 people willing to buy these coins. Now, the point I was trying to make was that sometimes a thing seems to be too good to be true, but it is true. And God's love for us might sometimes seem too good to be true, but it is true. It's freely given. People were getting, well, not quite a pound, 90 pence, free for nothing at all that they'd done. It was a free gift to them. But there was a cost. And who bore that cost? Well, in that case, it was me. And I could have done it slightly differently. I could have had 1 10p coin and sold it for a penny. That would have made the same sort of point, but I don't think it would have had the same impact on a congregation. But it would have only cost me 9 pence. I could have arranged to take 20 £50 notes and sold each one of those for 10p. That would have really made them sit up and take notice. It would have had a really big impact, but it would have cost me about £1,000. And on balance, I didn't think that spending £1,000 of my own money just to make a point in a children's address was perhaps the best way. But £4.50, that seemed about right. I was quite prepared to fork out £4.50 to make an important point, and I thought it was enough of an amount that it might actually make them sit up and pay attention to what I was saying. But there was a cost, and I paid it, and others got the benefit. Which brings us to God and his love for us. What is God offering? Sorry about the noise, by the way. I keep kicking the bucket. It's a waste paper bin, not a bucket, but I keep kicking it. There we are. We'll not kick it anymore. Right. Where were we? Yes, God says, "Give ear and come to me, hear me, that your soul may live." God is offering life in all its fullness, and he's offering it freely. This is what he wants to give to us. But although it comes without cost to us, there is still a cost involved. And the cost is the price that Jesus paid. Jesus, through his life and ministry, through all the ups and downs of that ministry and all the frustrations, and ultimately through his sacrifice, through his suffering, through his agonizing death, he paid the price. God's love for us is freely given, but it came at a great cost, a huge cost, one that we can't really even begin to imagine. We might see suffering going on in the world around us, we do. And in terms of physical pain, I think perhaps there are people who have suffered and are suffering even more than the physical pain that Jesus endured. But with Jesus, it wasn't just the physical pain. It was that anguish of having the weight of the whole world on his shoulders, in the end becoming separated from God the Father as he died on the cross. And he felt abandoned by God. It was a huge burden, a huge cost, but gladly paid by God in order that our souls may live. Let me read part of the New Testament passage, the Gospel passage for this same Sunday though. And again, I'm not reading all of it, just Luke 13 and verses 6 to 9. Then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, "For 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil?" "Sir," the man replied, "leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig round it and fertilise it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down." The way that God loves us is the way that gardener cared for the fig tree. The fig tree didn't seem to be doing anything useful, no fruit, but the gardener wasn't prepared to give it up. He was prepared to commit time and energy to looking after it, to digging around it, to fertilising it, to giving it all the tender care that it needed, that it might bear fruit. That's what God is willing to do for us. He doesn't want any of us to miss out on life. He wants our souls to live, and he's willing to pay whatever it costs, even the life of Jesus. Christ comes to offer us life and pays the price for us. But does this have any bearing on the very point I started with, about buying without cost and without money? And maybe it does. The tree in the parable didn't do anything to rescue itself. It was all the work of the gardener, but the gardener was looking for fruit, looking for some kind of response from that tree. When God speaks of us buying food, then that implies some kind of action on our part. If we just use the logical expression, which is receive milk and wine and bread without cost, without money, then that's very passive, just receiving it, doing nothing, just being given it. That's passive. And that's not what God is asking of us. He's wanting us to do something. Buying something implies a kind of active participation. And that's what's important. Perhaps it's the later verses that stress that more. "Give ear and come to me, hear me, that your soul may live." God's not wanting us just to be passive recipients, but to come to him. There's a moment in the film Aladdin, the cartoon version by Disney, where Aladdin brings his magic carpet up to the roof of the palace in order to take the princess on a tour of the city by magic carpet. And she's a bit hesitant, but he asks, "Do you trust me?" And he holds out his hand, and she decides yes, but she's got to say yes, and she's got to hold out her hand. And it's a simple gesture, but once she holds out her hand, he takes her hand, he pulls her onto the magic carpet, and off they go into a romantic song and into a whole life of adventure, and eventually they get together, and it all ends happily. But the princess needed to make that initial gesture of reaching out so that Aladdin could take her hand. That's all that God is asking of us. Come, hear me, listen to me, reach out your hand. It's not going to cost us any huge amount. No money is involved. No money needs to exchange hands. It's not going to cost us a huge effort or pain or suffering. All that's been paid for by Christ. But it does mean active participation. It does mean reaching out. And once we do that and he takes our hand and our souls live, well, our lives can be transformed as a result. The fig tree in the parable, we don't know how it ends. It's only a story. But the hope was that it would begin to bear fruit and blossom, and the efforts that the gardener put in would actually mean something. But the fig tree needed to buy into that, to use a phrase. God's love is freely given, but we need to buy into it without money, without cost. If anything I've said triggers thoughts in your mind that you need to pray about, now's a good time to pray. But if not, well, let's end with a blessing. The blessing of God, Father and Son and Holy Spirit, rest upon you and remain with you evermore. Amen.